So thank you for that, and thank you for praying for me. So as Xavier mentioned, my name is Marion, and let's get into it, right? Okay, so he did mention, I know you had Joe come last week. I know next week you have Dr. Richard, who is another really fantastic speaker on this topic. And then T, I think, will come towards the end. And this idea of faith and work. And I know last week, just to recap for anyone who wasn't here, just to remember, Joe spoke about this idea that God, the Bible actually starts with the story of God doing what? Working, right? And so work is not bad. Work is actually good. It existed before anything bad or the fall had happened. So God creates work, and then one of the first instructions he gives Adam and Eve is work, right? He gives them work to do. But when Adam and Eve choose to disobey God and eat of the fruit, several things happen. Adam and Eve get disconnected from God, but work gets affected. If you remember the consequences of the fall, they were told, even when you toil, the earth will be hard, right? Your work will not bear fruit. So work was affected, our relationship with God was affected, creation was affected. And I like starting by this, by reminding us that when Jesus died on the cross, he didn't just redeem us. He redeemed creation, he redeemed work, right? He came to overturn the fall. And so it's always good to remind, or I just like to make it known, that Jesus' death on the cross actually is a reason why we can engage in redemptive work. We can go to work knowing it is part of, or it is a privilege of having been saved, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the premise I enter this conversation of faith and work, which is that work is part, or Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection is what actually allows us to engage in it, okay? And I know Joe did a fantastic job of talking about it from business. I am only becoming a founder now, but I have worked, I've been employed for about 15 years now. And so I'm going to share from my perspective of being employed. Sawa sawa? Okay. So I also use a lot of sticky notes, so if you're wondering what's happening. So I'll be honest, the reason why I think this is important for me, and you'll see it, is because, hold on. A couple of years ago, I had a really difficult work experience, and I'll share about it a bit later on. And what happened to that work experience is I began to ask God, surely, does work need to operate the way it does, right? As you mentioned, I worked in advertising for very long, and advertising is a very difficult industry in Kenya, right? You work late hours, you're rewarded with alcohol. It's fancy and flashy, but it's also quite difficult. And I remember asking God, surely is the goal in life to just work and die? And evangelizing on Sunday is great, but my day-to-day is spent at work. How can I find an abundance of your love in this particular space? And one of the things that became very clear to me is, and I know Joe mentioned this, is that the rules of the world are control-based. And what do I mean? The reason you will get promoted is when you show a business or a company that you're able to control people and resources better, correct? Right? CEOs are better at controlling things than anybody else, right? And you get rewarded for control. But Jesus or God teaches us a gospel of freedom. He gives choice. And Joe mentioned, if you play by the world's rules will always draw you towards this space. But God's rules draw you towards freedom. And what does that mean? So today what I'm going to do is share some things that I have been able to do in my work and my years around bringing this to life. So, okay. So I have, as I've mentioned, been a leader. And one of the things that happened a few years ago is I joined a company called Mediacom. And my boss really wanted me to be the next managing director. And I was very clear, I did not want to be the managing director. Why? I look at leaders and I think your work is a lot of work, okay? I used to see the long hours. I used to see how difficult it was to manage people. And I was very clear, I did not want that journey. And I remember at that time thinking about the story of Moses. And so I'll start with telling you a story about a guy called Moses in the Bible. So in case this story isn't familiar, there's a man in the Bible called Moses who was born at a time when babies were being killed, who were Israelites. So his mother took him, put him in a reed basket, and the river where she knew the king's daughter would be bathing. The king's daughter felt empathy on the baby, took him and raised him as her own. Now, when Moses became a bit older, he had to run away, and he was in the desert. And the Bible tells us he was with his animals, and he saw a bush, and the bush was on fire, but the fire was not engulfing the bush. And as Moses drew near to it, he realized it was God, and God gave him instruction about going to help release the Israelites from Egypt, okay? Now, if you know the story, what happens is Moses goes to Egypt, him and Pharaoh have a battle of wits and power, and eventually he spends 40 years with the Israelites in the desert. But did the Israelites get to see the promised land? Did all of them get to see the promised land? No. In fact, did Moses get to see the promised land? No. And so I began to wonder, if we asked the Israelites, do you think they thought Moses was a fantastic leader? Do you think they would say, this guy has actually delivered us from where we were? And scripture tells us the Israelites complained 15 times. They even told Moses, you removed us to kill us. You brought us here so that we die. And yet, the Bible says that Moses saw God. He's one of the few people who saw God, a part of him. In fact, the Bible tells us when Moses died, it is God who buried him, as one would bury a friend. Now, why am I starting with this story? It's because for me, I think the premise I start this conversation with is that for someone who believes in God, the journey of faith and work has more to do with how it transforms us than how it transforms the workplace. And go with me here for a little bit. The reason we know Moses was fantastic is because we have the Bible to see the story, right? But if you were in the moment, you wouldn't see it. But if you read the story, it starts with a Moses who is stammering and ends with a Moses who is confident, who even intervenes for the people, right? And so as we go through the journey today, I want us to remember, one, work is good. But two, I truly, truly believe that the work or the journey of faith and work redeems us as individuals who engage with God in that. Okay? So, the first thing that I want to share is this idea of the transformational journey. So, this story Xavier has had several times. About 6 years ago, I joined Safaricom as a senior manager of youth segment. What this meant was I was responsible for creating products and services that target the youth demographic in Kenya. Right? My revenue target at that point was 3 billion shillings a year. It was high pressure, but it was very exciting. I mean, isn't Safaricom an exciting organization to work with? So I was really happy. But I was also quite young. I was 27 at the time. And I didn't see it as a problem because, to be honest, I was like, being young shouldn't be an issue. But in Safaricom, being that young was actually not considered a good thing, because how did you make it here at that age, right? But also being youthful, if I'm very honest in hindsight, I was very naive. I entered thinking we're a great big family, people will love me, aren't I lovable? And so even in meetings, I'd be that person who'd raise my hand and I want to propose to engage in different things. And I just didn't understand office politics. I just didn't understand. I never used to, people who can see, they read the room. I never used to read the room. And so I've told Xavier the story of how one time I was at my desk and I remember I got a phone call and I was like, hello. And the person said, hello, Marion, this is Bob. And that time it was former Safaricom CEO Bob Colimo. And I was like, how does he know my number? He picked it from the employee, email platform. And he's like, yes, so I hear you're doing the youth segment. I'd like you to come and present what you have planned for us. And I'd met Bob before during the interview. So I was like, okay, fine. So immediately I hung up, I ran to my boss's office and I'm like, guess what? He's called me, he wants me to do a meeting. And my boss is like, calm down. And we walked through what I would present. And so I go back to my desk and I tell my team and the teams that used to work with us, we're doing a meeting, this is what we need to prepare for. Can you send me your information? My boss and I had agreed, when I went to his office, he agreed I work on the deck, he will work on the logistics, meaning setting up a time, right? So I get a calendar invite from Bob's PA. The meeting day is happening. I think it was was it a Friday morning or Thursday morning? And so I go up to Bob's floor. I do the presentation. It goes really well. And I finish and I leave my boss and the directors up. So I come down the stairs. And I tell people that the moment I entered our floor. Our floor had about 250 people. I sincerely felt a cold wind come and engulf me. I don't know how to describe it. You know, when you watch movies or books, you're told there's a wind, a coldness. I now believe it was actually the Holy Spirit telling me, hey, Marion, you know? But I was like, So I felt a sense, and I walked into the room, and I could tell there's something that's off, right? And so I reached my desk, and one of my colleagues asked me, so how did it go? One of the people in my team, I'm like, it went really well. I didn't even finish the sentence when one of the ladies who used to sit next to me started shouting. So she says, how dare you? Who do you think you are? And I'm like, what? And she goes on and on about how dare I go for a meeting on my own. Do I think I do the work on my own? Am I the only person working on your segment? But one of the things I remember she said is, we're making money before you joined. We'll make money after you joined. Like, it was a very aggressive conversation. And so I'm trying to figure out why is she angry at me, but I'm also telling her, but I told you about the meeting. I'm not the one who set the calendar. I can't invite everyone I want to invite. And as I'm trying to defend myself, and then she stands, right? So now it's a full-on fight. And if you worked in companies that enjoy politics, literally everyone's desk was turned watching us. So we go at it, and at some point I remember telling her, okay, if I made a mistake, can you at least extend some grace to me? Because maybe I'm a man who doesn't understand the dynamics. She says, grace? You want me to extend grace? And now the shouting escalates. As this is happening, my boss comes from downstairs from the meeting. He walks, I remember he walked to my desk, said, said, when you two are done, come see me in my office. Like me, yeah. And he leaves, and I'm like, wow. So I don't even know how the fight ended, but I remember sitting down and getting a call from a friend of mine saying, wait, I hear you're fighting, who was in another company. So I had to explain, that's not what happened. Anyway, so believe it or not, I go home that evening, and I'm livid. I'm upset, and I'm upset for many reasons. Have I done anything wrong? No. Honestly, I've done an excellent job. I even said, remember in the fight, I said, I'm sorry if I've done something wrong. I really, truly am sorry. I've apologized. And I was like, Mungu, like I was genuinely very angry. And I remember God telling me, you need to go and apologize. And I thought, they say, get thee behind me. You know? I'm like, is it? But genuinely, I was like, why am I apologizing for something I haven't done, right? I remember God telling me, this isn't, when I say God telling me, because people ask, it was like a voice I could hear inside that I knew wasn't me, because I wanted to be angry. So the voice was in contradiction to what I felt. And God was saying, to everyone in Safaricom, this is the way they deal with each other. What people watched is the normal way in which people in this company behave. But you are different. And they will not know you're different if you manifest the same thing they're used to seeing. And he said, I'm not asking you to apologize because you've done something wrong, but you're apologizing because you've exposed people to something they shouldn't have been a part of, right? And by that I mean her team were also pulled into the fight, because I remember at some point she asked me, who did you tell? I told you, even your team responded, and they were done for, even you. And so the next morning, I did the cowardly Christian thing. I arrived very early so there'd be few witnesses. I found the team members who I needed to apologize. I apologized to them. And God was clear, don't tell them you're apologizing because you're a Christian. Just apologize, okay? And I apologized. I didn't apologize to the woman I was fighting with. The argument I used is he was not specific. But I know I was struggling. I was just struggling with, we'll address it later. Anyway, the reason I always share this story is because I do feel like there's a lot about the journey of trusting God with work that changes you, right? And the argument I use is God is always at work around us. He's always working around us. The privilege of faith and work is you join him in the work he's doing, okay? What I think we've often not been told is that the journey of joining him is what changes you. That is the benefit. That's the privilege, right? In this instance, God used something that was very difficult to begin to just mold me to know you shouldn't look like people. Just because the world of politics operates in this way, Marion, you cannot operate in that way. And I've also shared, Safaricom, till today, of all the employers I've worked for, was hard. Because, as I said, I was naive and I was young. Ironically, though, there's things that God always protected. I always delivered and I always performed. But I found it very difficult to integrate. I remember after that, please note, this story happened 3 months into my job, so it wasn't even that it was that long. So I remember telling my husband I want to quit. At about 6 months, he said, I don't think that's what God is saying, but you seek it and see. About 7 months in, I had, at that time, I think maybe if you ask me, I had maybe 6 friends, 6 people I considered my friends in the organization. And if you've heard of Lewa Marathon, it's this marathon that takes place, and Safaricom usually sponsors it. So what they had done is, if you're a staff member and you want to go, they'd give you a bus ride, transport to facilitate. Anyway, so Lewa Marathon is happening, and look at God. There is a football team that my husband used to coach years before when he was a youth pastor. One of the guys in that youth football team was working in the Safaricom shop in the airport. Are you with me? Right? He works in the airport, Safaricom shop. I work in HQ. There's no way we'd ever meet. But the day for Lewa Marathon, he was in a bus with my colleagues on their way to Lewa. And my colleagues are talking really badly about this girl called Marion, who is so, I don't even know who she thinks. Like, they're having a really aggressive conversation. And he's listening and wondering, this girl is mbaya nyewe, right? And then he meets my husband a few days later, and something asks him, wait, you told me Marion works for SAFCOM. What department is she in? And he says, she works on a product called Blaze. And the guy was like, oh no, it's her they were talking about, right? And I remember my husband came and told me that story. I equally felt, ay Mungu, of the 6 friends I had, 2 of them were in that bus. And those 2 did not defend me. And it felt very isolating. Very isolating. If I'm honest, I'm still not 100% sure I've ever fully gotten over what felt like 2 years of corporate bullying or being in a very tough environment. But there are things about that moment or that point of loneliness that truly, truly made me question, honestly, who is my help? Where does my help? Kiro, even when you think your friends or your colleagues are your friends, who truly is my help? Who truly is my advocate? And later on in life, like the company I work in now, I see company politics and I think this is high school. Me, I've been in doctorate level politics. This is not disturbed me at all. And I've wondered whether truly part of that experience is so that now I'm not phased, because now I work in an NGO, and NGO politics are different, but they're childlike. It doesn't even stress me. In fact, my boss says, you're always so happy. I'm like, yeah, because I have gone through the fire, But it is to say, and I think the reason I like starting with this story is to always, I really want to truly make it clear. It is not a happy-go-lucky, lovely, everything is successful. Again, and the example I use is Moses. If you ask the Israelites, Moses was not a successful leader. But there's an internal work of what God was doing in my life that I think those situations truly, truly helped in. Sorry, as I said, I usually have papers, which means I usually everywhere, all over the place. So let's go to this idea that God is always at work, and it is a privilege to join him. Now, one of the things that Xavier mentioned was, what are the practical ways you integrate faith and work, right? Now, if we all agree God is always at work, there's always opportunity to join him. One of the first areas that became very evident for me was with my house help, because she's my first employee, right? And I was privileged enough that one of the Bible studies I was in, the lady there was, Christians we must obey the law. So you have to pay above minimum wage or minimum. If you can, at least, if you're not earning, but if you can, there's no excuse not to. And so we were paying our nanny above minimum wage. And what my husband and I said is, one, if we're to truly join God in the work he's doing in her life, we have to, one, see her as God sees her. But we must also look at what God desires for her life. And God desires that each and every one of you can earn from the work of your hands. It is his desire. Well, sinful, which means we may not always, but it is his desire. And so we began by asking ourselves, what is the value of our house help's work? Right? What is the value of my nanny does? I believe the value of her work is at least 45,000 bob. Meaning, if I could pay her that, I think it would be worth, the value of the work she puts in. So some of the things we decided to do is we'd say every time we'd get a pay rise, we'd give her a pay rise, right? Every time we'd give her, we wanted bonuses, so we also give her bonuses. we had a pension, so we'd give her pension. Pension meaning we'd save some money, put it in an MMF for her. So we were constantly asking ourselves, how would we want to be treated as an employee? And we replicated for her. Now, God is always at work, but that doesn't always mean things work out the way we think. So a couple of years later, I decided to take a sabbatical from my work. I wanted a break. I wanted to finish my master's, but I really wanted to also rest. But a sabbatical meant I wouldn't have a salary anymore. And I don't know if my husband will allow me to say, no, I think he would, because we've talked about it several times. But for context, my husband for the longest time worked in ministry, and he was clear. We were both clear in our marriage. God had said, I will bless you through your wife's salary. So we also knew, right, that my sabbatical would significantly certain things we wouldn't be able to afford. One of them was that our nanny's salary had outgrown us, meaning we could no longer afford to pay her because I was on a sabbatical. Right? And I'm telling you, we felt guilty, And I remember there's one conversation we had with someone who said, the problem with paying someone a lot is the day you can't afford them, you will have to throw them back. But that comes from a position of fear. We knew God was saying, you obey me, that is my problem, right? So we reached this point, we can't afford to pay her anymore, and we can't reduce her salary for the same amount of work. So we lobbied our friends and got somebody else who could hire her for the same kind of salary. But she was unhappy. She was terribly unhappy. Now, the other thing that had happened, remember we were keeping for her pension and MMF? So when we were giving her severance, we were able to give her 170 Gs. So she got her severance pay. We did it's painful, this is difficult, my kids are unhappy. But do you know, my nanny had always dreamed of owning a boat in Kisumu, near the lake. I think, is it Rusinga Island? And so she used the money, bought a bit more, built a boat, and she was now earning 3,000 bob a day after payment of workers, after, petrol. That was what her brother, who was now at the island, was sending her on a daily basis. And the reason I share that story is because for me it was a testament that God is the orchestrator of impact. All we do is believe. It is his work, not mine. It is his work to redeem my households position of work. It is his job. He is the one who's invested in her. All I got to do was to join him in the privilege of being part of how he blessed her. And my human capacity was only able to reach so much. But to see God say, that's all I needed from you. I knew what I was doing, and I knew that at this point, you are having to let her go would stimulate a chain of reaction of events that she's now able to actually own a boat that makes more than you were ever going to be able to pay her. And I say this because as a leader, I have seen times when we fought for employee salaries. When I worked in advertising, there's a guy we fought for. HR told us you can't pay him that much. We said, why? And we fought. And just when we got HR to agree, he resigned. And I remember thinking, we've nganganad for you, but that assumes I am the orchestrator of the impact, right? That assumes it is my responsibility to see you to the end. Moses got a job. He's not the one who saw eventually the promised land, but it was the obedience, right? And I think the most practical thing I say is God is always at work, which means if we're not hearing him, it is not because he's not saying anything, it's because we are unable to hear. And it also doesn't mean that if you join him in his work, it will always be successful. Another example I give is, for context, I have worked in Airtel, Safaricom, advertising in our NGO. When I was in advertising, my second round of it, I became the managing director of the agency. So it's called Mediacom. We're doing about 1 billion shillings in we used to call it cash flow. But it's more of the media buying. We used to buy about 1 billion Kenya shillings a year. And when I became the managing partner, I had a vision of the kind of leader I would be, okay? And I was me, when I'm a leader, we won't be working past 5, okay? And by the way, I was very clear, I had my own manifesto. And when we used to do pitches, so pitches is when we'd go to companies and beg you, please give us your money, we're really good. And the way pitches worked in advertising, they were horrific. We'd work overnight, weekends. It was a really toxic time. I was our pitches will be done on Fridays and people will get to see their families. So Marion becomes managing partner, I'm managing director. I have my first pitch for KCB, and I follow through. So we'd meet during the week. A week before the deadline, we were done. We submitted, not a week, maybe a few days too. We submitted the pitch on Friday. My staff went home, right, for the weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, on Saturday, an employee calls me crying because we're going to lose this pitch because I'm not serious. As a leader, I've sent them home. I have sent them saying, Marion, do you not care about this business? Do you not know that this is important? You have sent us home, and other agencies are in the bar with their laptops typing the pitch. It was so ironic for me that the culture of toxicity was actually how they thought they thrived. Does that make sense? Like sometimes when you try and redeem, creation fights you. People fight you. They're like, no. Who told you we have a problem with unfair wages? You know? And I share that because I remember she even made me get worried. I wondered, am I not a serious leader? So I called my boss and I said, am I not serious? I've sent people home. Should they have been? And I mean, she calmed me down and told me, Marion, have you done the best possible job? Yes. You have to leave the rest to God, right? Thank God we won the pitch. Let me tell you, I was genuinely like, Mungu, even if we shouldn't win it, this I just need for me. I don't know what I'll do because I think I was too vulnerable in that moment. And we won it, thank God. But I wanted to give you an example of how even in our attempts to redeem, we assume the world will welcome it, right? Another example I give, and again, these are very small, simple things we used to do, but you'd be surprised at how either difficult it felt for us. So when we're in Airtel, I don't know if you guys remember, nowadays we don't see it as much. Pre-COVID, we used to have girls and boys who'd stand on roundabouts handing out flyers quite often, right? And one of the things that used to disturb me was how tiny the dresses and shorts were for those BAs. And this time, please, some of you may not know, those BAs used to be on the street, brand activators, at 5 a.m. in the morning to start handing out flyers. So when I joined Airtel, I was a head of brand and media. So I used to be responsible for all media, experiential, all events, including activations and digital. So one of the things we did when we joined is we said, these girls and these boys are people's children, right? And by people, not only their mothers and fathers, but God's child, right? And surely we cannot allow them to go out in the freezing cold. So what we did is we gave options. So we'd tell a BA, you get 2 types of uniforms. You get shorts if you want, or a skirt, and you also get a trouser and a hoodie. So you have an option for cold weather and an option for hot weather. And the reason it was key for me is because I once almost got a brand activator job. And the reason I denied it or rejected is because I knew I didn't want to stand in those shorts, right? Now, small things like that, the business never fought me. Airtel didn't care as long as the work was done. But you'd be surprised, and I don't mean this as a bad thing, but you'd be surprised how many things in organizations continue to happen, not because anyone's refusing them to be changed, but because nobody's trying to change them, right? And we changed it. Our BAs were happy, and they felt empowered, and they felt, valued, and we still delivered the things we delivered. And so that's an example of where it went well. But with the example I'm saying where I was being told I was a bad leader is an example of where people fought me. And I remember God telling me, were you treating them that way because you want to be seen as a good leader or because it is something I'm asking you to do? Because if you want to be seen as a good leader, you will change your tactic because people aren't happy with it. But if you truly believe I'm asking you to do it, even if you lose the pitch, it is worth the obedience, right? And so that has happened quite a bit in my life in terms of moments where I think I've had God say something and people have not necessarily responded, but I have felt the privilege of knowing if this fails, it is Mungu who truly has told me. Another one I'll tell you, so as I mentioned, I work in advertising. Advertising has categories that are called sin categories, which means alcohol, condoms, and Christians often in advertising don't like working on those kind of jobs, right? But I was the managing director. You don't get the option of saying, I don't want to work on this, because it is how your staff are making money. So we got this campaign called Chukua Selfie. I don't know if you guys remember it, but it was a HIV self-testing kit that we were trying to push. And these HIV self-testing kits were really cool in that you just needed 3 minutes, you prick yourself, and you can tell your status. But the way the agency wanted to communicate this campaign was with a lot of nudity and a lot of sexual innuendo. which, by the way, our research was telling us the young people did not want. Okay? The young people were saying, why can't we have a conversation about sex that's respectful? What is with all the nudity, genuinely? So I was actually lobbying, not from a personal preference, but because truly I felt this was the truth behind what our customers were saying. And I pushed and I pushed and I pushed, and the organization said the client wanted to go the nudity way. Let me tell you, the extent of this campaign was such that we launched it in a strip club in Tao. They went the full spectrum of nudity. Anyway, and I remember one day one of the girls walked into my office and said, Marion, can I speak to you? I'd never spoken to this girl before. She was in another agency. She said, how are you working on this campaign as a believer? And I thought, wow, well, one, I'm a believer. Well, that is progress. And we had a conversation about it, and I was very clear with her. I have done everything in my human capacity. Truthfully, between me and God, I have done all I can do. At this point, I must allow a client, I must honor choice. If God honored the choice in the Garden of Eden, who are we to dishonor choice? The client wants to choose this path, you must allow them to choose this path. Guys, that campaign launched and was shut down in a week by the Ministry of Health of Kenya. Okay? And I remember the client called us in a fracas on Friday. Oh, the Ministry of Health has shut down the campaign, they banned it because of other things, by the way. And I thought, look at God, like, look, he's invested in my creative jobs, Truthfully, he is. Like, there's something very validating to know. My boss knows I have done everything in my power. She thinks I'm a fantastic employee, aren't I? Yet God has allowed for what would have been very detrimental to have been shut down. Because he is the one who's actually more invested in your lives than I am. Who am I to think I'm one who cares about young people more than God? And I remember sitting in that meeting as a client. Ministry, the worst people to upset is Ministry of Health in Kenya, because they even refuse to come for the meetings. Now they do, you will tafta us. And so we tafted them for a month. By the time the campaign went live, it had lost a lot of its luster. And I'm giving you that as an example of you will have limitations. And I've had Christians ask, I am in a company where my boss wants me to be corrupt and they want to pay a bribe. I have told them not to bribe. I have lobbied. I've said, I won't bribe, but my boss has still chosen to. That is your limit. And that if God honors choice, God will honor the choice your bosses have made. But yours is simply to obey him in your limit, right? And I think that has been so freeing. To be very honest, maybe the one thing I will tell you is it is very freeing. It is truly very freeing to allow yourself to be used by God in that way. Now that my fancy papers have, see. But the other thing I will tell you, and I also say this, God is at work. Always at work is a privilege. But if you refuse to join him, he will still work. Okay? It is interesting for me how sometimes I have assumed that God revolves around me. And so if I know this, sometimes we're told if you don't step up, who will? The rocks will. God will. Imagine, to be honest, he'll figure out an alternative. It is a privilege for you to join him. So you join in earnest, in excitement, because you want to, not because you have to. So let me just say it here. There is God offers freedom. The privilege is in being able to join him. Now, I don't know if you guys know this story. It happened a few months ago. So there's a case I remember watching on news in February about a Kenyan man who was convicted of trying to murder his wife. Now, the story is that this guy worked at KCB. He was the director of strategy, I think, or something. And he took the early exit, retrenchment packs in September. His wife had relocated to the US. She had run away. She had apparently claimed that he was physically abusive and she was scared for her life. She had applied with police. She had abstracts. She'd even written to the KCB HR team, by the way, saying, I am trying to say that this man is going to kill me, but because of his position as a director here, no one is willing to help. Anyway, the woman and her children managed to flee and they go to the US. So this man, remember, takes his package in September. Now in October, he visits the United States. And he enters those roadside motels. You know the ones we see like on TV, which is a road and there's a motel. And he walks in to have a drink. And as he's sitting there drinking, a man sits next to him and they start a conversation. And as they're talking, this husband begins to communicate that he's very upset at his wife and is looking for some way to deal with the problem. And as they chat, he eventually confesses that he's trying to find someone to kill her. Okay? Now, what is interesting is that the man who had sat next to him was a state trooper, just in unmarked clothing, by chance. So the state trooper listens to the story, says, okay, let's meet in like a couple of weeks, I'll find someone. So a couple of weeks, they get a private investigation, undercover. The guy comes, tells him this is what I want to do. And I remember reading that he told them, I want her to die a slow and painful death. It has to be painful. And do it in February when I'm back in Nairobi. And then he gives money for the down payment. And that is when he was arrested, right? So now when I was watching it, it was, I think, on February, he was going to court in Brooklyn. And I remember the woman saying, I told you, KCB. I told you, government of Kenya. And none of you did anything. And to be honest, she even had copied the CEO at the time. And I truly wondered, truly, if I was the HR in that company or the CEO, and I get an email like that, what would I have done? I honestly do not know, because I also know we have limitations in what we believe is scope. But I remember thinking, I'm so grateful we serve a God who intervenes when human beings are incapable or unwilling to, right? And so I always like to remind us there is absolute freedom. You're not being forced to, but it is a privilege of walking with God when you allow him to invite you into that process or that journey. It's a dark story. It's not meant to be, it's dark, it's hard, but it is meant to really truly encourage you that you cannot allow yourself to fall into the guilt of feeling like I wish I did, because truthfully God is the orchestrator of that impact. Yours is purely to trust and join him. But I also have some really nice examples to lighten the mood. I have some really nice examples of instances where Christians have impacted and we don't know. So for example, I'll give you an example from a friend of mine who for the longest time had endometriosis, was unable to have a child, tried IVF, and eventually adopted. But when she was adopting, she realized her company didn't have an adoptive policy, which means maternity leave is given for mothers who give birth, but if you adopt, you don't get maternity leave. And she lobbied her company, lobbied, and they now have an adoptive maternity leave policy. And I think even now the Kenya government has one as well. But that's an example of someone who, their situation, they leaned into it and said, how do I? Because surely does God not want any mother or any father to spend time with their child? No. And so there are many people who come to that company who never know she was the one who lobbied. They'll never know it was a Christian. But they will enjoy the benefit of someone who used God to improve their situation. I have another friend Safaricom is a huge organization. I have another friend who was in Safaricom years before, Kaleche. And Kaleche struggled with this idea of how when women give birth, it's slightly different, how quickly they have to go back. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
I hope so. And so what Kaleche did for her is she said, is 3 months surely sufficient? And so she spoke to her Bible study member and said, I'm struggling to go back to work. I feel like I truly should have more time with my children. And so she went and researched, looked at other companies globally, what's their maternity policies, proving, she was trying to build a case for, if you allow women to spend more time with their child, they actually come back more energized and willing to work harder for you. The reason Safaricom has a 4-month maternity leave policy and a 6-month half-day is because of the lobbying work that Kaleche did. Again, another believer, she's not there anymore, but even you, if you join the company today, would benefit from the privilege of someone who allowed God to walk with them in that way. Is that making sense?
Yes.
This way. Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, so those are other examples I'm saying of I have seen Christians step in and do small things, and the impact, it has been transformational. I have often wondered, imagine you're a Christian and you're in procurement. One of my biggest challenges with procurement has been why we pay in 90 days. It disturbs me. Because usually I think the people paid in 90 days are the ones who need that money in 2 days. And so imagine a procurement who says, actually, the smaller companies are always paid first. You know what I mean? Or who begins to rationalize, how do we offer the benefit of companies earning so that this journey is less painful? I've also wondered, what if insurance companies actually paid doctors on time? And yet there are Christians in this place, aren't there? And so it is just to tell you, I think I want to constantly remind us, God is always at work. It's not a secret. He's not hiding what he is doing. The journey, again, if you're not hearing him, is how then do you hear him? It is again to remind you, doesn't mean that the journey turns out the way you want it to turn out, but the privilege is in the journey of actually joining him. But one of the things I also do share is, so if Moses was leading the Israelites and they're complaining and they're grumbling, right? And, oh, Moses, we're hungry, manna. Oh, Moses, we're thirsty, water. Oh, this water sucks. Oh, we're tired. And they were constantly complaining. I remember there's even a point when Moses told God, kill me. These people of yours, kill me now. I don't know if you guys know that. He said, I'm tired of them, kill me. Even he said, what have I done, Lord, that you don't have mercy on me? You've given me, he was genuinely very upset. And I actually wondered, I don't know if it's happened for you, but I truly began to wonder, Lord, why is leadership so lonely? Why is it? And maybe some people say it's not lonely, I'm happy for you. But for me, why has it felt so lonely? And I think there's part of it which is twofold. One, you're leading a people, and a people who can see you. The people could see Moses. Remember when they said worshiping the calf is because they said Moses had gone for so long. We were leaderless. So they said worshiping something else. So they have you. They have a physical manifestation of a leader. A leader has only Jesus. And the difficulty with that is because you can't see him, it feels harder sometimes to attune yourself to what he's saying. And you can tell your people something and they can hear. Sometimes God's voice feels distant. I think that's one of what made it very hard. But I think the second thing is because when God tells you to lead people, he tells you to love them as he loves them, right? So you see their sin and he says, still love them. I think for me, I struggled believing, and I say this, leadership is like having, for me, children, your sin, you see your sin, it's magnified. And yet to believe that I'm this sinful and God is using me was very difficult, right? And so I was like, if I'm always lobbying for people, Lord, if I'm always the one at work looking for the ways you're working and trying to join you, who is lobbying for me? And so when I started working, my first ever job was in an insights, it was called an insights agency. And I really loved my job. I truly loved my job. And I was earning 30K at the time, which I thought I felt I was wealthy, okay? I genuinely felt I was very wealthy. And I remember one day, my colleague left. He was very sloppy. He used to leave his things everywhere. I was clearing a desk and I saw his payslip. He had left it on my desk. And he was earning 45,000. I felt betrayed. And this is the reason I felt betrayed. I honestly used to work. And I say this not as I don't say I'm not as a brag, but I think if I'm sincere, it is slightly I'm slightly bragging. I genuinely think I'm a fantastic employee. The joke I tell people is I think when God created me, he said, she shall be employed. She has all the skill sets to make her a fantastic employee. I am fantastic. I am loyal, I'm reliable. I will stay up till 4 a.m. to do your job if I tell you I will do your job. I am good vibes. Like I'm those people you like and love. Honestly, sincerely, I'm a great employee. But so I used to work much more than this guy. Like he used to walk into the office at 11, leave at 2. I used to be there at 9, leave at 5. Like I was pulling in the weight and I knew what campaigns I was running. And he's earning more than me. Like I was like, Mungu, even my boss couldn't feel shame. Now remember, I said this story by saying, was I unhappy before? No, I was even happy with my 30K, but now I was upset. Now I was like, Wamenidharau, I'm no longer happy with this role. And I actually was particularly upset with God because the bosses were Christians. I was like, you didn't even speak to them during their prayer time. You didn't feel like this was worth bringing up, I was so bitter. So as irony would have it, I got another job offer at that time, and so I didn't even look twice. So they increased my salary to 56. I said, Acha Staki, and I moved to the other company. But The current job I am at is an NGO. And again, when you get a job, you really think, I remember Marion said, I think I'm a fantastic employee. So when I got the job and I started working, I was like, woo, I did, my background was in international relations. I always wanted to work in development. So I was like, oh, finally. And I remember a few months ago, my boss was telling me, do you know, we're having a random conversation. And she's like, do you know, for example, you were number 5 on the short list? I was like, what? It's like, yeah, you were number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. But she's like, I always hire the number 5. She says number 1 and 2 know how to deceive HR. Number 3 doesn't. But she's really very clear. My boss is very, she's like, number 1 and 2 know how to deceive HR. Number 3 doesn't know where they're on the list. Them, they're never, It's like number 4 is never often as passionate. But number 5 are hungry enough for the role. And yet they're not so excellent that they think they are excellent, right? And do you know, I never knew I was a number 5. And I thought, imagine God lobbied for me there. Truthfully, it wasn't my CV clearly, right? Is that he actually lobbied for me. And I felt like, I don't even know if that's something you should tell your employees. Because I remember thinking, this is irresponsible feedback. But I felt privileged that God allowed me to hear. Imagine, Marion, I fight for you where you don't know you're being fought for. You're upset because the salary, you thought that's the fight we're having. But he fought for my job. Because like, you actually gave a number 5. And they love me. As I said, I'm a good employee. They love me. But it is to say, he actually is fighting for you. He genuinely is. It is just that it doesn't look the way it should look. My current job doesn't pay me as well as my former job did. But I am really happy. Oh, thank you. You're afraid? Okay. But I'm truly happy. I feel seen. There's a lot of things about it that's an answered prayer. And so I truthfully began to wonder how many areas has he been fighting for on this journey of leadership that I am truly not aware of, right? And I'm like the Israelites, I'm grumbling and complaining. And even as I say that, I'll probably complain today because we're very short. We're like children. We forget very quickly. But that day, that conversation with her was a moment of, oh my goodness, you are doing a lot for me on this journey. And again, that is a privilege of joining God in this work, is when he allows you to see it. You are like, what? You are fighting for me in spaces even I didn't know I could fight for. There's a program I'm doing currently with Stanford, and one of the reasons why, when we're doing the application, that they liked my application is because I spoke about the difficulty I had in corporate, how hard and isolating it was. And they felt it was very authentic. And I thought that's another space where God used pain to allow my application to appear unique. You know what I mean? And truthfully, he is fighting for us in our workplaces, just not necessarily in the way we would want or make it appear. Let me see. Johnny, kuna points mingi, lakini I have to check what it is. So finally, as we go towards the end of it, what am I trying to say? Right, so one, what then does this mean in terms of practical steps? You notice none of the things I've told you have the practicality of, the 5 steps too. And I think Joe said this last week. It is not a step process. As I said, you could do all the good things that you think you should do, and people could still reject you. I don't mean it pun intended at all, genuinely, but they could still deny your leadership. You could do all you can, and your company still fails, right? You could try to be a fantastic boss and follow the world's rules and regulations and not deliver that. And so that's not the intention of this session. If that's what you get out, that would be wrong. It is to tell you that it is a walk. It is a privilege. And the privilege comes from knowing God is always at work around us. Joining him in that work is a privilege that will transform you. I mean it. It's in the small things, the things that no longer stress you, to how your heart becomes softened towards the people. And that journey of joining him is what I would hope for each of you. But that 3, it also isn't something magical as we think. We may not always get to see the impact of joining him. The full story may not always be evident. If it is, praise the Lord. But if it isn't, the journey of walking with him is sufficient, imagine. That is what will give you the ultimate joy around it. I think 4 is to acknowledge that it can be very isolating, it can feel very lonely, and that is why we have a helper. That helper doesn't always speak. The times I want them to speak, it doesn't always sound the way I wanted them to sound, or hasn't always told me the things I have wanted to be told. But you are not alone. And again, if you feel like God doesn't speak to you, join him in his work. It'll become evident, because the struggle will lead you towards that point of saying you have to speak. But then finally is to also know that he is actually fighting for us in the background, in what we cannot see, that he's our cover. And there is freedom in joining him in that work, because we're not responsible for the outcome. And what joy is that? And so, yes, so Xavier knows I usually have a million stories, but I think I have done a good job in finishing on time. Thank you. It is to say, I think I would love to pray for you. It is to say that truly may you find the joy of joining God in the work he's doing in your workplace, whatever it is, and in whatever position that it is in. Can I pray for you? Okay. Lord, thank you for these children who you love so dearly, who you died on the cross for. Thank you for the privilege of speaking to them and with them, that I could share what you've done in my life. I pray for what you're doing in their lives, for what you're doing in their workplaces. I pray that they may truly see work as a way you're redeeming them to yourself, but even their colleagues and creation to you. For those who are longing to hear your voice, help them hear. For those who are hearing it and just unsure, struggling, make it easy. And by make it easy, Lord, I mean make it clear. Do not stop pounding on their door, that they may hear you. But finally, let me also just thank you for the privilege of work, that we can earn from the work of our hands, that we have bodies and brains that can actually apply themselves to that. We are thankful for the mercies you have given us in that regard. And may we truly experience the joy of bringing all that into joining you in the work you are doing in our workplaces. In Jesus' name I pray.